Kickstarter launched in 2009 and changed the internet forever. The website lets you create campaigns to fund a product or idea, and iconic projects like Peloton Bikes, Aura Rings, and the Critical Role cartoon really show the power of the platform. Though there have been many controversial projects, like the Ouya console, which was such a big deal back in the day. We really thought the Ouya was going to outcompete Xbox and PlayStation, and the final product was basically an Android phone in a square box, featuring mostly terrible games. But I do think overall most Kickstarter projects that are funded meet expectations. And I also think Kickstarter has been instrumental in the independent toy and comic book space, which are both incredibly hard industries to get into, much less make your own toy line or comic book that is fully your own vision. So I think overall Kickstarter has been a great benefit to independent artists and entrepreneurs. But what happens when a massive company creates their own Kickstarter platform? Well, that very thing happened in 2021. When toy company Hasbro introduced their own crowdfunding platform called HasLab. And in today's video, we're going to discuss why it should not exist. What's good, internet? Jake here, dumb as ever, and while I was fine with the HasLab platform for its first couple years, my opinion on it has soured greatly, and I want to discuss its history, why I think the program is bad, and what Hasbro could do to improve it. So please join me as we dive into this controversial side of toy history, and please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoy the video. It'll help me against my ever-present arch-enemy, Algae Rhythm. In 2018, Hasbro announced their first HasLab project, Jabba's sail barge for their Star Wars Vintage Collection line, which features smaller figures at the 3 3/4 inch scale. This project had a huge $500 price tag and required at least 1,000 backers to fund. This project did in fact fund, and I will say the sail barge is very impressive. It is a massive vehicle with a ton of little details and play features. It honestly reminds me of the original USS Flag with its size. And Star Wars fans seem generally happy with the release, which is always a surprise. Also, the playset made me realize something. How did they get Jabba the Hutt's big ass into that sail barge? Maybe they airlifted him in, who knows? After the success of the sail barge, Hasbro moved on to their next project, and it was a big one. The HasLab Unicron, the planet-eating menace from the first animated Transformers movie. We had gotten a couple of Unicron toys in the past, but none of them had really touched on the character's massive scale until this HasLab project, which required a minimum of 8,000 backers to fund the toy. And at a whopping $600 per unit, this was a huge toy with a huge price tag. The project was announced in July of 2019 with an end date of August 31st, but according to the website Jedi Temple Archives, the project was only at 3,097 backers by August 26, just 6 days before the deadline. So Hasbro actually moved the deadline back by more than a month, with the new end date being October 6th, with their explanation being fan requests. But the project didn't actually fund until October 5th, the day before the new deadline. So while Hasbro claims it was for the fans, I can't help but feel they saw the project was going to fail with the first deadline, so they extended it. But on the other hand, after the new deadline, Hasbro reported that the campaign had 12,000 plus backers, which is quite a bit more than the required 8,000. I've heard the reason for this jump was them adding pre-orders from other e-stores, because Hasbro Pulse doesn't exist in several countries, so HasLab pre-orders are sold through online shops like Big Bad Toy Store. It's completely possible that the HasLab was always going to fund, and Hasbro really was giving fans more time to buy it, but I do think it's fair to distrust and question these big companies. Unicron eventually shipped out 2 years later in 2021, and while I think the novelty of the figure is really cool, who doesn't like a giant robot toy after all? I also feel like this thing looks like a pain to play with, transform, or really do anything with. I also think it's crazy that Hasbro chose to not paint his bottom teeth, especially when they were painted in the promotional shots. Like, for a $600 toy, I would expect premium quality, and yet they skimped on paint just like any other retail release Transformer. I will say, out of any HasLab, I do feel like Unicron justified his existence. There's no world where Hasbro could release a retail version of this toy. It's too big, too heavy, and costs way too much. So in my opinion, even though I don't personally care for it, I think the Unicron was a great first project for Transformers, and a prime example of what a HasLab should be. Also, check out the sick prototype version I saw at TFCon this year. I was shocked when I saw this thing. What was wild is that at nearly the same time they announced Unicron, they also announced a competing HasLab, which was a 38-inch tall replica of Cookie Monster from Sesame Street. Kind of a bizarre collaboration, but the toy itself looked great. It was posable, fluffy, and huggable. But at $300, very few people wanted to buy it, and only 624 people funded the project, which had a goal of 3,000 backers. And unlike Unicron, the Cookie Monster did not get an extension and became the first failed HasLab. I can see why. Sesame Street is a kid's show, and while it has plenty of adult fans, for a lot of people it was just a preschool show they watched as a kid. Not really the typical target for one of these collector grade figures. And Hasbro also ran this campaign at the same time as Unicron, which means any Transformers fan that also likes Sesame Street was likely unable to fund it, due to Unicron being $600 and all. The next year in 2020, Hasbro ran 3 more HasLab campaigns. The first Marvel HasLab, which was the Sentinel from X-Men, a vintage collection version of the Razor Crest, which is the Mandalorian's main vehicle, and a rebooted version of Hero Quest, a board game that simplified D&D for kids. All of these campaigns succeeded, so it was kind of a quiet year for HasLab, but Hasbro majorly picked up the pace in 2021 and dropped 5 campaigns over the course of a year. The next Marvel Legends HasLab, Galactus, launched and was a huge success. Galactus was a classic Build-A-Figure from the Toy Biz Marvel Legends days, and the HasLab version is so much bigger. The next Transformers campaign started shortly after Galactus, featuring the Japanese-only character Victory Saber, who was essentially the Optimus Prime of the show Transformers Victory. And the set featured the separate characters Star Saber and Victory Leo, who could combine into a robot called Victory Saber. While I felt Unicron was a completely justified HasLab, I do not feel this way about Star Saber, which is an amazing looking toy, but doesn't feel like this character needed to be a HasLab. The set could have easily been translated into a Titan class, or they could have sold the robot separately, with Star Saber being a commander class and Victory Leo being a leader class, though I think the Titan class would have been the better option, especially considering the slot for Titan that year was given to Cybertron Metroplex, who is a cool character, don't get me wrong, but unfortunately he's a little bit of a boring design, and he went on pretty deep discount after he came out, signaling poor sales. In my opinion, I think Star Saber would have knocked it out of the park in the Titan slot. Even if you don't know the character, he just looks badass and heroic with an incredible color scheme. This is my primary issue with a lot of HasLabs. They don't feel necessary. I can totally see why they would use the program to make large characters like Galactus and Unicron, and I can also see why they would use it to make massive vehicles. But Victory Saber could have totally fit within the Transformers ecosystem. For the past couple of years, it's felt a bit like the Transformers team is using HasLab as an extra slot in their release schedules. Rather than these figures being true events like Unicron, they're just extra figures for the year, which would be fine if not for the exclusivity window. Once a HasLab is over, you can no longer order the figure from Hasbro, which I just think is atrocious. It creates an incredible amount of FOMO for consumers, which, if you don't know, is fear of missing out, which is something I hate and I am vocally against. But how could I advise against FOMO when Hasbro themselves are putting the figures on a timer? For an incredibly short amount of time, by the way. 45 days is not a lot of time to buy a toy in the grand scheme of things. And any people that become fans after that amount of time are going to be completely out of luck, because since these are limited runs, the aftermarket prices suck, and a Victory Saber HasLab can run you $400 to $450 on eBay, which is a huge increase from the original $180 price tag. Every toy, even mass-produced ones, can become rare and expensive, but because Victory Saber was a HasLab, it never had a chance to not be expensive. In the same year as Victory Saber, Star Wars suffered its first failed HasLab, the Black Series Rancor, which would have been an articulated version of the massive beast from Empire Strikes Back. I'm kind of shocked this HasLab failed, and to be fair, it got very close to funding. But from my research, it seems like the Rancor just did not have the hype it needed for the price they were asking, and the stretch goals were not appealing to fans. From this point on in the video, I'm going to skip through a lot of these projects and only highlight the ones I really have something to say about, starting with the Plasma Series Proton Pack, which was the first Ghostbusters HasLab and the first HasLab for a role-playing item. From someone who is not a Ghostbusters fan, This HasLab seems like it did very well with the fans, as it is very faithful to the original movie, and Hasbro went to great lengths to replicate the Proton Pack from the film. The most interesting thing to me about this roleplay toy though, is that they actually re-released it. In October of 2025, they announced a reissue of the Proton Pack with a few changed details, but ultimately it's the same product. This is incredible, because until recently, this has never happened with a HasLab before. And in 2022, the first G.I. Joe Classified Series HasLab was announced. One of the biggest parts of the G.I. Joe franchise is the vehicles, and because the original G.I. Joe Real American Hero toys were 3 3/4 inch scale, all types and sizes of vehicles were able to be released at retail. But since the Classified Series is a line of 6-inch action figures, it is a lot harder to make scaled vehicles. They've done a couple, but the biggest vehicle at retail has been the Vamp, a 2-seater Jeep sort of vehicle, which is a good size but still not huge. So when HasLab announced that the first Classified campaign was the Hiss Tank, I can't say I was surprised. But I will also say that I hate that the Hiss Tank was a HasLab, because it's easily the most iconic Cobra vehicle, and it may be the most iconic G.I. Joe vehicle in general. So locking it behind a HasLab feels awful to me. But like the Proton Pack, the Hiss Tank is being re-released kinda. The Arctic Assault Hiss Tank is a white and gray repaint of the Cobra vehicle, meant for snowy conditions. The toy is being sold as part of Hasbro's made-to-order program, which is similar to HasLab in that it has a time limit for ordering, but there's no goal that needs to be hit to actually get made. If you pre-order it, you're gonna get it, which is an aspect of the program I really like, and they've been slowly introducing it first with Marvel and now G.I. Joe. But while I like that one aspect, I'm still extremely split on this release. This is kind of presenting the same problem as the HasLab. It is a limited time item and it will feed into FOMO. But on the other hand, this is a repaint of the Hiss Tank, and I'm more forgiving towards repaints as exclusives because I see them as non-essential. So overall, I just don't really care about this release, but I do care that they're re-releasing a HasLab project. And I also think the made-to-order system is interesting, because it could be used for some straight reissues of some HasLabs. I could totally see Victory Saber being re-released, maybe without the stretch goal rewards or something. I do feel like Hasbro is leaning against doing something like that though, because of the 2 reissues they've done, both have been altered in some way. I feel like Hasbro is worried that if old HasLabs are reissued, the fans might not fund new HasLabs, but I really don't see why that would be the case, especially if they set a standard amount of time for a reissue, like 3 to 5 years, which is a super long time for toy collectors. But again, these projects seem to thrive on the fear of missing out, so I do wonder if Hasbro would ever be willing to reissue these HasLabs. And I will say, if they use the made-to-order system, it would essentially be the same problem. But more copies of the toys would make it into circulation, and hopefully aftermarket prices would drop a bit. So even though I think reissues being made to order isn't my favorite solution, I would still take it. So yeah, I think my main 2 problems with the HasLab projects are the lack of availability after the project is funded, as well as HasLabs not feeling like they need to be HasLabs. And I'm going to illustrate that point with the last subject of today's video, the HasLab Tron set, which was revealed earlier this year and failed in a huge way, with only 1,000 people backing the set, when the campaign needed at least 10,000 backers. The set is based on the original Tron movie and would have featured 5 characters, 2 light cycles, and a light-up display base for them. And notably, the scale for the figures was 3 3/4 inch, which is actually my preferred action figure scale, as I grew up with toys in that smaller scale like G.I. Joe and Marvel Universe. In the past 10 or 15 years, the action figure standard has become 6 inch, but with this set, Hasbro announced their Hasbro 375 initiative, which would bring the scale back in a more meaningful way. I was actually excited by the Tron set because of this announcement, but the set failed miserably because of the outrageous $260 price tag. Hasbro was actually smoking crack with that price, especially because these figures are not in the usual 6-inch scale, meaning a majority of their collector base was immediately uninterested. If Hasbro is using this project to gauge interest in the Hasbro 375 initiative, I demand a recount. I really hope this overpriced project didn't mess with any of their future plans for smaller scale figures. I personally believe that would be a bizarre line of logic, but oh well, Hasbro is gonna Hasbro. So in this video, I covered my main issues with HasLab as a program, mainly the engagement of FOMO with the lack of reissues, as well as HasLabs being projects that don't really feel like they have to be HasLabs. But I will be clear, I have nothing against the teams making these toys or the toys themselves. I think all of my issues revolve around how Hasbro does business as a company, and how Hasbro does business is out of the hands of toy developers. They can only work within budgets, deadlines, and projects. So I think most toy developers at Hasbro are just using the tools they have, and delivering the products they can deliver. Just wanted to clear that up because I genuinely hate being negative in this space, but sometimes issues need to be pointed out so we can find solutions. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. And if you'd like to support me past that, I have a YouTube membership and Patreon. For $1 a month, both give you the same thing: an invite to my super chill Discord server, as well as access to my backer exclusive series called Toy Dive, where I take a look at random toy lines. Alright y'all, thanks for watching, ciao!